Welcome to episode 150 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing Craig Van Sickle. He is a television writer and producer, and one of his many creations was the hit TV show The Pretender, which ran in the late 90s. He's got a ton of great stories and advice for people who are looking to break into TV, so stay tuned for that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leave me a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread the word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mentioned in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast and then just look for episode 150. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast and then look for episode number 150. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing screenwriter Craig Van Sickle. Here is the interview. Welcome, Craig, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Ashley, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So to start out, maybe you can take us back to your early days as a writer, and maybe even before that, college, moving out here. What made you wanted to become a writer, and kind of how did you actually put that into action once you knew that you wanted to be a writer? What did you actually do to start facilitating that?
Okay, yeah. What's great is everybody who's listening and everybody out here has their own unique story about how they got to where they are now, and mine is my own. But I was fortunate because I was a junior in college and I kind of knew that I wanted to be a screenwriter. And one of the major things that actually facilitated that, I grew up in Chicago. I went to school at Indiana University in Bloomington. So I was nowhere near Hollywood and didn't have any family background in Hollywood. So it was kind of like, this would be a big jump for me if I was going to do this. But I kind of figured it out in junior year of college because that summer I had entered what they called the Danny Arnold Comedy Writing Scholarship. Danny Arnold created Barney Miller. This was probably a show that a lot of maybe your listeners don't remember, but it was a hit sitcom back in the 70s and early 80s, I think. And so Danny put on this nationwide comedy writing, basically scholarship contest. So I thought, I'd never heard anything like that, but I thought this would be a good way for me to gauge, am I fooling myself with my ability, or do I maybe have something to offer Hollywood? So that summer I came home, did my 9-to-5 job every day, and I wrote a MASH script, a MASH spec script, and toiled over it every day, every night, and finally got it done, sent it in. And at the end of that summer, I got a letter from the scholarship saying that I was basically one of the finalists in the nation. I thought, wow, even if I don't win, this is a sign to me that there's I've got something to offer and I'm on the right track. And because that's one of the big questions you have. You can write in a vacuum and you don't really know, especially at that young age, do I have any talent? Do I have the ability to actually make it in Hollywood? One of the hardest industries to break through and excel in. And that was a big yes to me. And now, of course, contests and festivals are just everywhere. And I think, chosen correctly, a writer can get a lot of positive feedback and a lot of positive direction on their ability through those festivals.
Yeah. And was this spec script literally the first TV script you had ever written?
It was. It was the first thing. I'd written a lot of short stories. I started writing in junior high, and I even knew then I wanted to be a writer. I was a big Twilight Zone fan, so I'd write these little O. Henry kind of short stories with twist endings, and sometimes they'd have aliens, sometimes they wouldn't. But anyway, so that's where I cut my teeth. And then when I got to college, I met one of my professors was a former script writer, and he kind of said, well, if this is your area of expertise or your area of interest, why don't we do some independent study? So I was actually earning credit to learn how to write scripts. So he was fully encouraging me to get into this Danny Arnold thing. So that summer I wrote a MASH script, and then when I got back to school, I started writing just spec scripts for shows that I loved, which, you know, in this era still holds true. If you want to break into TV, which is what I know more about, pick a show that you love. Pick a show that you know the characters backwards and forwards, you know their inner voices, you know the structure of their stories, and just write a spec script. Now, you're not going to sell it to that show, very unlikely that you will, but it'll stand as a sample that you can get an agent with, that you can maybe get in the door of another show, a similar show. So I highly recommend that. So I started doing that in college. There was a show called Lou Grant, which was a spinoff from the Mary Tyler Moore show, The Character. It was an hour show. First time I think they'd ever spun a sitcom character into an hour show. I wrote one of those. I did, I did Barney Miller. I did several hour shows. And I continued to do that actually after I moved out to Hollywood. After I graduated, I said, I'm going. So my best friend and I moved out here. And shortly thereafter, my new writing partner and I started writing spec scripts because, you know, our friends would sit around, we'd play poker, we'd complain about how bad the shows are on TV. And one day we kind of looked at each other and said, well, why don't we do something about it? You know, it's a lot, it's very easy for all of us to sit and criticize and judge. But really the only way you're going to make it as a writer anywhere is to write and keep writing, keep rewriting. And I was a big believer in that. So we started writing spec scripts. One of which was a show called Remington Steele that I think a friend of a friend knew the executive producer of Murder, She Wrote, which at the time was the #1 show on television. And they'd said how this guy was telling the audience that there was no young mystery writers out there. So we looked at each other and said, hey, let's write a mystery. So we watched Remington Steele. We kind of knew the show. And we sent it to him. And one day we're sitting in my apartment in North Hollywood, and the phone rang, and it was Peter Fisher, who created Murder, She Wrote and ran the show. And he said, so, yeah, he said, I read your script. He said, when did they produce it? And we said, they didn't produce it. It was a spec script. And he said, great job. He said, why don't you come in and pitch the show next week? So that was kind of the first really big break to go in and pitch and to try our hand at breaking into TV. Later, we found out it was a women's conference, and there's no way we could have been at this conference. We told him we were there, and we heard him say that, and so he kind of caught us in our little lie. But you know, don't hesitate to embellish the truth a little bit. If it gets you in the door, that's what works. So
yeah. Back us up to your Love Boat episode, because wasn't your Love Boat episode before that?
Yeah, I was. You're right. Thank you for keeping my timeline straight. Yeah,
sure.
The Love Boat was the first thing we sold, and that was another friend of a friend. We were using some offices down in Hollywood of a company that produced Casey Kasem's America's Top 10. This is my partner. And one of the guys working there, he said, yeah, one of my good friends is a story editor on The Love Boat, which was in about its 9th or 10th season, one of its last seasons, and it was one of the top 10 shows year in, year out. And he said they really desperately need new material. So this was like a Thursday or a Friday, and I remember, never forget, it was Super Bowl weekend. I'm not even sure, probably was about 1985. And Steve, my partner, and I at the time said, let's go for it. So we went into the office Saturday, Sunday, like almost 24 hours straight, and we wrote this Love Boat episode that we had. Sent it to our buddy on Monday. He said, okay, I'll get it to my friend at Love Boat. And they read it Monday night, and Tuesday we got a call, and they said that we're buying your script. And, of course, we just about fell off our chairs because we just didn't think it could, A, happen that fast, and B, happen, you know, this was like our dream. This was our first sale, you know. I said to myself, you know, hey, I can go to the deli and get one of those nice corned beef sandwiches now. I can afford it, maybe a 6-pack of beer or whatever. My needs were very simple back then. But that's how it can happen. You know, just there is some who you know. There is seeing an opportunity and seizing upon it, too, is a big thing. Because a lot of times I'm kind of a believer in kismet, and sometimes you hear things and you don't really act on them, and then later you wish you had. And so for people listening out there, just keep your eyes and ears open, because you never know where that opportunity might come from.
I just want to clarify two things. You mentioned you were using this office, and I just want to be clear, that's your like day job. You're like doing administrative work at this office, and so you just decide to, they're nice enough to say, yeah, sure, let you use it on the weekend. Because I know a lot of the people listening to this, they have day jobs too. So.
Yeah, it's actually the office my partner worked in. I didn't work there. I had another job. And I was always hanging out there. When I got off work, I went over and we hung out, and we were kind of just the two 20-somethings that were just, amusing to them. They'd been all in the business for a long time, and I think they kind of picked up on our ambition and our drive. And so they were very cool with, he had a key to the office. He says, if you guys want to use the office on the weekends, that's great, do it. And so that was very cool. It was the Scotty Brothers, Sid Vintage, who produced the Casey Kasem top 40 countdown or something. So,
I'm curious. So you're basically just living in Hollywood, kind of trying to meet a young guy, trying to meet as many people. You're getting these sort of leads, like someone knows someone who knows someone. You guys. You strike where the iron's hot. You hear about this Love Boat. Were there other instances where you guys went into the office, wrote a spec script over the weekend, sent it out on Monday, and then never heard anything? Because I think it's always important to just get a sense of the scope of what you were doing, because it always makes it sound like you did one thing, it worked, and then you were off to the races.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I don't want to make it sound like it just was like automatic, because we put a lot of hours writing scripts that never went anywhere, going to tapings and trying to go to meetings, and we had probably two or three agents before we found the one that we were with, and we sold the Love Boat. And so there's a lot of work and diligence and writing and rewriting that goes into it. But I'm going to contradict that and tell another story, which was my partner Steve Mitchell. He worked as a runner on, I don't know, it was some kind of Steve Martin special at the time, and he was a delivery guy. He would deliver scripts to the producer's house and whatnot. And one of the producers was Paul Maslansky, who produced the Police Academy series for Warner Brothers, which at the time, back in '81 or '82, were the #1 box office movies in Hollywood. So he was a hot producer. And Steve knocked on his door one day and he said, yeah, I delivered some scripts for you on Steve Martin special, and you told me one day that if I ever had a feature to pitch, that you would hear my pitch. And Steve later told me that I never really asked him that. He said, but Paul was a really nice guy, and he said, yeah, come into my office in a week and pitch me your movie. So we did. My partner, we went in and we pitched the movie, and it was he didn't really get it, and we had a spec script. He said, but I'll read the spec script, and we never heard anything. That was months went by. Anyway, the first Police Academy movie came out, first of the second one, I think. And in the review in Variety, I don't even remember who the reviewer was, he cited 2 jokes in the movie, and both of those jokes Paul had taken from our spec script. And so we were just kind of like, your first instinct is, he stole our jokes and didn't pay for them. But our second instinct was, how can we turn this to our advantage, right? So we called Paul up, and we he was very nice, and he said, yeah, he said, I can see that now. I may have gotten those jokes out of your script. He said, what can I do for you guys? I'll help however I can. And we said, well, we'd love to do a project with you. And he said, okay, let me think about it. And a couple of weeks, probably months later, he said, I really want to do a police academy on the ski slopes. Would you guys be interested in putting something together on that? We said, absolutely. Hottest comedy movie producer in town. We're like nobodies. Of course we would. So we came in and we pitched this idea called Ski Patrol. And he said, yeah, I'd like your take. We'll develop it. And back then, they did more pitches and they developed more pitches than they do now, but we can get to that. And he was such a powerful guy at Warner Brothers, he called us like the next day and said, oh yeah, we're gonna put the deal in motion, your agents will get a call, and let's develop this movie. Well, to go to your point, it was 4.5, I think 5 years later before that movie ever got made. And so that was about 85, and the movie got made in 89. And it wasn't a Warner Brothers movie. It became kind of a low-budget thing. It turned out okay. It wasn't great. There's a lot of famous people that are in it now that like to bash Ski Patrol. Paul Feig, who of course is now a big director. He was in the movie, and Martin Mull and George Lopez. They all loved to bash Ski Patrol about how bad it was. But so I'll tell stories of myself. But again, that was kind of another one of those right place, right time, seized on the opportunity. Now, what was funny was that after that experience, Paul said, you guys, you kind of seem like you want to do features, but you also want to do TV. He said, my recommendation would be pick one. And we were at kind of a crossroads. We kind of had the same feeling, and Steve and I and our partner decided, let's go to TV, because waiting 5 years to get your movie made is, as many writers I'm sure out there know, it's pretty hard to do, because you don't know one day to the next it's not going to happen, it's going to happen, and that can kind of take its toll. So we decided to focus on television at that point.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's go back up to the Murder, She Wrote story, and you get in there to pitch to him one of your take on Murder, She Wrote. Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Okay. We walked in to Murder, She Wrote. Again, at the time, it was the #1 show on TV. We were nervous as hell because we'd never pitched before. This was like a great opportunity. And I want to add, because I think your point is well taken, it was an opportunity we got through our writing. The writing was good enough to get us into that door. It wasn't just like we lucked into it, but the writing and that script that we got, the Remington Steele script, we worked a lot of hours on that thing. So I recommend to everybody out there, just keep writing and rewriting. You'll get that script to the point where it's going to open some doors. So we walk into Murder, She Wrote, and we had no idea how to pitch a show. And we said, okay, our first episode is Jessica Fletcher's in a circus and the clown dies. And it was kind of like, huh? Pretty great, huh? And they were just like, what are these guys talking about? And so lo and behold, we fell flat on our faces and we bombed out. We didn't know what we were doing. And so we spent another year. It was another year of learning our craft. We wrote several more spec scripts. We went to a lot of tapings, a lot of PA work to kind of just get more facts about what we were doing. Did a lot of reading about how to pitch, and we discovered, the key thing with pitching is you got to give them enough information that they can hook into and they can see, okay, these guys know how to tell a story. They can understand characters. And on Murder, She Wrote, there was only one regular character. It was Angela Lansbury's character. The rest were all guest stars. So you have to demonstrate that the world and those characters are interesting enough to sustain basically a closed-room mystery is usually what they did. So about a year later, we felt like we'd done our homework, and we called Peter Fisher back, and we said, we dare you to give us another chance. We think we can come in and knock it out of the park. And to his credit, he said, okay, come on in. You punks can come in. It's okay. And so we went in and we pitched 3 ideas, fully developed. It wasn't like we pitched every beat, but they could see it Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. In those days, it was Act 4, Act structure. They could see we knew the characters, we knew the show, and we sold 2 or 3 ideas in that pitch. Again, that was doing our homework, doing hard work, learning what we didn't know the year before. And Peter bought 2 ideas. And from that, he put us on staff of a spin-off show the very next year as his story editors.
Okay. Now, at what point did an agent or a manager come into play? Were you able to get an agent after selling the Love Boat script or before the Love Boat script? Like you just said, you called this guy Peter up. He's running Murder, She Wrote. Was that a call you guys physically made, or did you have an agent call him?
No, that was a call he made to us, because we didn't even get in the script through an agent. I think at the time, if we had an agent, we were about to leave them or they were going to dump us. I don't remember, because we weren't getting anywhere. The spec script, again, was something that we got to Peter through kind of a friend of a friend, or word of mouth. It was, again, somebody had said they'd heard Peter at this conference. And I think we just got the address to the Murder, She Wrote offices, and we signed a release form, because they won't read anything if there's no release form. And we sent it in with our script, and to his credit, he read it. I mean, he didn't, we were shocked, I think, that he read it when he did, and then picked up the phone and called us. That's very now.
But then the year later, when you guys called it, was that a call you and Stephen physically made, or your agent made that call?
We made that call. We had an agent. I think we got an agent off of the Love Boat script, but the Murder, She Wrote thing was kind of already in progress, and we kind of felt like let's just challenge him ourselves, writer to writer, because Peter was very much a writer kind of guy. To challenge him kind of personally. We felt that was a better approach in that instance than having an agent call. So that's the way we did it.
Okay, perfect. So now you're on a show as a story editor. Maybe just talk us through some of the highlights and bring us up through The Pretender. I know you and I had a great talk about the show with Stephen J. Cannell, Cobra. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, how that was developed. I thought that was entertaining and educational.
Sure. So we got on Peter's spin-off show, which was with Jerry Orbach. It only lasted a season, but we learned a tremendous amount. And Peter's his staff and his producers were all older guys. They were in their probably late 40s, which to us at that point was older because we were in our 20s. And so we learned a hell of a lot. Tom Sawyer, Robert Swanson, all those guys they really took us under their wing. They invited us to dailies. We started to learn about more than just beyond the writing, just a little glimpse into the world of producing television as well. So we did that. The show went off, and then from there we ended up we went on a show called Alienation, which was one of the first shows that the Fox network ever did. We were talking about Tom Noonan earlier. I don't think Tom was there yet, but this was the same. This came on the same year as The Simpsons, and it was based on the movie Alienation. And so we went to work. We got hired by Ken Johnson, who was the showrunner. And unfortunately, that show only went a year too, which that was a series that really could have gone for a long time. But it didn't quite fit the Fox mold, I think. But so we learned just a little bit more. We had offices off the studio lot, and they did all the editing and casting and everything in this kind of warehouse down off of Figueroa someplace. I'm not even sure where it is now. So again, it was another year of kind of seeing what goes into a TV show beyond just the script. We got to write a lot of scripts. We got to rewrite a lot of scripts. We were story editors on that show. And again, it got canceled. After that, our agent got us a development deal, which are, again, more rare now than they were back then, with Warner Brothers. And one of their first shows that they put us on was called The Flash. Well, The Flash is on the CW right now. This was the original Flash, based on the comic book DC. And at that time, they were kind of starting to open up the books to DC and the properties. We went on that show. It only lasted a year. And I think I mentioned when we talked earlier, it was kind of funny. After that, we kind of found ourselves, we were constantly being pigeonholed. Like after Murder, She Wrote, we were mystery guys. And after Alienation, we were sci-fi guys. And after The Flash, we were comic book guys. And Steve and I always knew we could do so much more. I mean, we really wanted to do more. We wanted to stay versatile. We wanted to show, keep it fresh and do different things. So after our deal with Warner's was up, we got hired at Stephen J. Cannell Productions, and Cannell was such a great mentor, a great man, and he was so generous with his talent. And he really, we used to kid it was Cannell College, showrunner producer college. And the first year we were there, we were producers on a show with Carl Weathers. It was first run syndication. Cannell was the master at that. A show that he sold just in syndication and wasn't on a network. So we thought, great, we'd love to do that. Did that show for a year. It went off. And then one day we were sitting in our office, literally in Canada, knock on the door, and the door opens, and it's Stephen J. Cannell, the face you've seen 1,000 times, pulled the page out of the typewriter. And a guy who obviously brought us into the company and we worked with. And he said, hey, I was thinking about it. I really have enjoyed your work on the show. And he said, would you guys want to maybe create a show with me? And, that's like God saying, hey, would you like to be my friend? And we were just like, yeah, we would love to do that. He said, great, come into my office tomorrow. We'll kick around some ideas. So the door closes, and I think Steve and I ended up dancing around the office, so excited to finally get the idea, to finally get the ability to create, become show creators. Because our goal all along was never to just be staff writers. We said we want to get our own show on the air. That was always our goal. And that may not be everybody's goal, and that's fine, but it was one that we never lost sight of. So we ended up creating this show, another syndicated show with Cannell, and we shot it in Vancouver, and it was very low budget. I mean, we did 22 episodes for $600,000 an episode, and we had all the money up front. And Cannell said to us after day one, he said, "This is your budget. You can't go over budget. There's no more money. Go with God, guys. So, and he oversaw us, but he really threw us into the deep end and said, sink or swim and go for it. I'm here if you need my help, but just do it. So we did, and we started writing scripts and planning the show. And like every first season of every show, there's a lot of difficult potholes. A lot of, is your actor any good? Are your directors the right ones? Are your scripts any good? And you're learning as you go. This is the first show we ran. First episode we shot, we brought it into the editing room, and it was a disaster. And Cannell, we said, look, Stephen, we think we can fix this, but he said, meet me in the editing room tomorrow, whatever. We go in, and Cannell, in the next 20 minutes, turned this really lousy episode into, he retold the story. He rewrote the story in the editing room. It had nothing to do with the script that we shot. He said, move this scene before this scene and use this take on this actor and not this one. And we got this, handheld version of how to edit and write a show in the editing room, rewrite a show. And it was probably the most valuable lesson we ever learned as showrunners. And ever since, we've always approached things with the script is not the final draft, the editing room is. And that's where you can really save a bad show. You can make a good show great just by judicious editing and whatnot. And Cannell taught us all those things. He taught us how to cast, what things to look for, and it was Cannell College, and we shortly thereafter graduated from Cannell College.
Yeah. I mean, and maybe you could elaborate on that, like tips on casting. What are some of those tips?
You kind of have to have an eye for. You kind of have to have one eye on, like, what is the commercial choice here, especially in syndication, a show that is not going to have the benefit of network promotion, but maybe a show that only gets advertised in TV Guide or nowadays it would be online ads or something. So it's hard to get eyes on your product. So when you're in casting, try to cast somebody who is maybe a known actor or actress, but not if they're going to compromise the ability to do a good show. So you'd have to. There were times when it's like, oh man, this guy that's reading for us is like an icon from my childhood. It's like I'm in awe of what he's doing, but ultimately you have to kind of stand back and say, is he really the right choice for this character? He'd do great to sell the show and all that, but he might not be the right person. So we might have to keep looking, and we might find a person that maybe isn't quite as famous but was a better actor. And that was one of the things he really taught us. You can't just put all your eggs in the star basket. You've got to have actors and actresses that can deliver the goods and elevate your material. Otherwise, it's just going to be cluster.
Yeah. So let's talk about The Pretender a little bit. Maybe you can kind of talk about how you ended up getting that show on the air, and maybe just take us back to the very beginning. Where did that idea come from, and how did you develop it?
Sure, be glad to. We had actually shot a pilot, wrote and shot a pilot for Fox that didn't end up going. It was kind of a family drama we shot in Florida, and it had every wild animal you can think of. We had lions, giraffes, we had kids. We broke every rule. We had kids and animals. You never work with kids and animals. It was directed by Rob Bowman, who, of course, did Castle for 10 years and was one of their EPs. Anyway, it didn't get picked up by Fox because they had just bought the NFL package, so our pilot didn't fit into it. So Steve and I found ourselves back renting an office. We rented a small little cubby on Cahuenga, building's still there. And we were kind of just at the point where we said, we need to write exactly what we want to write. There's the tendency as writers to try to read the marketplace, and I can tell you right now that is a dangerous trap that will never pay off fully. And I know there's derivative shows that come on every year, and there's a lot of derivative stuff, and there are writers that are benefiting from that. But in terms of really being true to your own voice and what you want to do, you got to write something, even if it's like, is that really a very commercial idea? Is it, be true to your voice and write what you think is best, because that's what you're going to write best. So The Pretender, we had always had this notion, or we came up with the notion of great fantasy fulfillment. What would be like a really cool fantasy fulfillment? And the thing we came up with was, well, most people on the planet wish they could be somebody else, or they wish they could be something different every week. And we thought, well, that's kind of an interesting idea. We've never seen that on TV, where the main character is literally something different every week. So that was the first kind of nugget. Then we started to we wanted to add some depth and layers into that. And two things came about. One was we both read an article, I think it was Rolling Stone or some obscure, more obscure magazine, about something that the CIA was doing called the Genius Project. And the Genius Project was literally the CIA would recruit children from up and down the eastern seaboard, and they would bring them into the CIA to play, to come to school and play games. And in the morning they would do trigonometry and algebra. And these were like kids from age 5 to age 10, but they were brilliant kids. So in the morning they would do their classes, trigonometry, algebra, English. And then in the afternoon they would play games, fantasy games like thermonuclear war or cloaked invasion or stealth warfare, that kind of thing. And what they would do is they would literally pick the brains of these genius kids who, at that age, their brains are unfiltered with adult stuff, and they would get these ideas. It's like a kid would say, imagine a jet that nobody can see. And from that came stealth technology. I'm like, yeah, radar can't pick this. So they did this program. We thought that is absolutely fascinating. The idea of a character who was a genius kid who basically was, in our case, kidnapped by kind of a Rand corporation. The center was our bad guys. Kidnapped by the center at a young age and brought in, and they used his genius to simulate different scenarios for corporate clients or whatever. So they were getting rich off of Jared, who was our main character, off his brilliance. That was the second element. The third element that kind of solidified, well, what do you do with a guy who can be something different every week, was this was all during the O.J. Simpson trial. And, I'm sure most people are familiar with the amount of evidence against him and all this stuff. And there was a preponderance of feeling in Los Angeles at the time of, a guy can get away with murder, he can get the best lawyers and get off, get out of, from going to jail. And we thought, well, what if there was a guy, and we all read in the newspaper and we turn the page, what if there was a hero who didn't turn the page, who said, okay, this story about this guy who's harming little children, or in this day and age is wearing clown masks to scare people. It's like that's wrong behavior. What if your hero was a guy who said, I'm gonna go after this person, and they're gonna pay. In our case, we called it emotional justice. I'm gonna put them in the same situation that they put their victim. So now we had our three elements. Guy could be different, somebody different every week, different profession. He was a kid genius raised in this nefarious center, and he was out to help the little guy right the wrongs that were done to them. And that was the show. So in our series, he escapes the center, and in the first one, he was a surgeon, and he just walked into an emergency room, and he saved this little kid's life. And what we find out is he was in this hospital because there was a bad doctor who had operated drunk on this kid and had paralyzed the kid. So the emotional justice template that we put together was, in the last scene of the show, Jared, he orchestrates it so this guy who was drunk is actually on the operating table, or the guy that let his drunk doctor operate is now on the operating table, and the doctor comes in who's drunk, and he's going to operate on this guy. And at the time, it doesn't sound very edgy now, but at the time...
It does. It actually does sound very edgy, even to this day. I think that does sound pretty dark and edgy.
Yeah, it was pretty dark and edgy, especially for its time. But and actually one of the notes, because in our script, Jared gets the administrator on the table, in comes the drunk doctor, and he says to the administrator, whispers, he says, I would operate myself, but I'm not really a doctor. And he walks out of the operating room, And the next thing you see is the drunk doctor staggering towards the table, putting the gloves on, about to do open heart surgery on his boss. And you don't know that Jared stops it or does anything. Like, typically at the time, the hero would never have let that operation happen. But we wanted the audience to think, yeah, he did. Jared let it go. And the network kind of got a little queasy about that, so they kind of made us put an ending on it, said, okay, he didn't really let the operation go through, but he freaked out. He freaked out the guy, the administrator, and he gave him emotional justice. He made him feel what that little boy must have felt when he became paralyzed. So that was the genesis of it. And we wrote it spec. That's the important part. We said, we can pitch this idea, and we actually pitched it once to an executive who was a very big name now, who was at Fox at the time, and he passed on Pretender. So we said, instead of pitching this, let's just write it. We want to write it the way we want to do it, and we did. So we wrote it spec. We didn't get paid for it. And when we finished it, our agent the next day sent it to the four networks, Fox, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And I think it was probably less than 2 days later we got a call that NBC wanted to buy it. Steve McPherson, who went on to run ABC, and David Nevins, who is now, I think, at Imagine, they loved the Pretender script. So they bought it, and then we started developing it with them a little bit, but they wanted to know all the answers and all the secrets, and we said, well, if we tell you all the secrets, there's no reason to watch, and you know what, you don't have to buy our script, we'll just take it back and sell it to somebody else. And no, it's okay. If you think that's the way to go. And so we shot the pilot, and it ended up testing higher than anything they'd ever tested before. Even Bonanza before was their highest testing pilot. Tested higher than that, tested higher than the ER pilot. In fact, Warren Littlefield, who ran the network at the time, had our testing framed in his office, and the numbers kept going up. So structurally, we've done something right in the pilot.
Yeah. So I want to, and I ask this question a lot to the writers that come on, and you just kind of touched on something. You had this dark ending. You guys as artists and creators have this dark ending that is maybe not quite what the network can swallow. Just in general, I mean, we don't have to talk about that one specifically, but in general, how do you deal with notes from the higher ups or from really anybody? But I guess it's really from the higher ups because they actually have some power over you. How do you deal with notes that you don't agree with? And what is your strategy to kind of get through those minefields? I know I've had a big problem with this as a screenwriter, to the point where it takes the fun out of the project when you have this thing that you love and they go and change it and mandate changes. It takes the fun out of it. It's just no longer something that's even remotely fun in many cases. But how do you handle that kind of confrontation?
Having done it a long time, I've gotten notes from every end of the spectrum, from the network dumbass who doesn't have a clue about what they're doing to the person who I have great respect and admiration for creatively. They could both be network executives or studio executives or whatnot. So I think you could ask any executive that we ever worked for, and they would say, Van Sickle and Mitchell they're really good listeners. They're willing to work with our notes. They're willing, because we never wanted to be combative creator writers. So we wanted to give the idea a shot. So the note was only usually as good as the person giving it. It was kind of the way we saw it. But even if it was somebody we didn't really respect, we were respectful in dealing with their note. We'd say, we might voice like, I think that might kind of throw us off on a bad tangent, but you know what? Let us take a look at it, and we'll see, if it's something that works or doesn't. Then we would, in many cases, we would just ignore the note. And then when the next round of notes came, if that person, or if they kind of said, well, what happened to that note I gave about, we would just explain why we felt it didn't work, and most times they were accepting of that explanation. Now the notes, and fortunately, we've been blessed to work with some really good people, and most of the notes that we've gotten are good notes. I would say 50% of the notes we've gotten have been good ones, and that's a pretty high percentage.
Yeah.
Most writers think they're all dumb notes, and there are a lot of dumb notes out there. But we were, I think maybe we were a little more forgiving, or had more ability to kind of give something a chance if we were on the fence about it. So believe me, executives really want to know that they're being heard, and I think every writer out there should listen. If you don't agree with it, there's no reason to be combative or disrespectful. You just say, let me take a look at it. Let me see if it's something that fits. Don't be afraid to voice your doubt, but there's really no reason to be a jerk about your notes. I mean, there just isn't, because it's just, I don't know of any project that's gotten better through animosity. So just be cool. It's going to be okay. You're gonna pull the script back into the garage. You're going to tear it apart. You're going to look at it, and the note works or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you just tell them why it didn't. It's as simple as that. It doesn't have to be full of anxiety and animosity.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you wrote this original pilot script on spec, and I'm curious what that all entails. You have the whatever, I guess it's going to be a 45 or 50 page pilot script. Did you then write a show Bible to go with it? Do you also write maybe 2 other episodes? Like when you're going into, I mean, that original thing that your agent had, what exactly is that? Is it just the pilot script? Is there a show Bible? Is there a couple of other episodes?
I think at the time, all we had was the script.
Okay.
And our agent at the time sent the script to the 4 networks, and that's all they had to go by. After that, after NBC committed and said, we want the script, take it off the marketplace, then we had several months of, probably 1 or 2 months of talking about the script, what are you going to do in future episodes, what are you going to do in future seasons. But now it's really changed. I'm not positive that a buyer, unless it was like just a really huge name behind the script, I'm not sure a buyer these days is just going to buy off of the script itself. There's just too much paranoia and fear in the business and the economy and all that stuff. Now they may love the script and they say, we're really intrigued by this. Can you come in and discuss the show with us? And in that meeting is where the writer has to be prepared to say, okay, here's a couple of sample, just general episodes for the first season. I see season 1 kind of arcing to this place. Maybe season 2 arcs to here's what the cliffhanger will be, and have an idea as to what maybe 2, 3, if you can, 4. Just a notion of where 4 seasons could go in a really general sense. Be prepared to talk about more in depth about where you want to take each character. For example, one of our main female lead in The Pretender, in the script, she's written, frankly, pretty black and white, pretty cut and dry. There's not a whole lot of depth there, and that was one of the things they said. Oh, we love her voice, and she's kind of sassy, but where do you see going with this? And so we had this whole thing. We knew where we wanted to go with her and to humanize her and deepen her character. So you should have that in mind, too. Where are you going to go with your characters, your storylines? And The Pretender was episodic. And since he was somebody different every week, I mean, literally we could just open the phone book and say, oh, he's fireman, policeman, FBI agent. We have that sort of thing going for us on that idea. In this day and age, most of these shows are not episodic. They're whole season arcs or their whole series arcs, Breaking Bad. In that case, like I said, you got to be prepared to discuss kind of here's where the whole first season might go, second season, and so on. So they get a sense of, hey, there's a series here, because now they really want to know in their hearts that there's a full-on long-running series here. And the good thing now is, like, some of these orders are 8 episodes, maybe 13 max. It's much easier to do that kind of thinking, and so you should be prepared to do that.
Yeah. One of the things in my writers group, someone put up, and I'd be curious to hear just your take on this. Someone put up a script that was structurally similar in that there was like 2 or 3 main characters, but then every week there was like a new cast of other characters. And one of the notes the writer got was, we weren't sure how this would work, and I started to think about shows. You just mentioned, I mean, The Love Boat was precisely that. You had your stable of reoccurring characters, but then every week there was new people. Murder, She Wrote was like that. The Pretender. Is that something that is not as prevalent now, or is it just, coincident? I couldn't think of any modern shows like in the last 5 years or something that had that structure where it's one guy with a sort of a guest cast every week, or even 2 or 3 or 4 guys.
I can't really think either of, and we kind of knew that what would make The Pretender work was we were going to have to build our villains and that whole side of the story into something that was 50% or more of the show. And frankly, the lore that we created on that side of the show became what really fed the online fandom. They wanted to know more on Miss Parker and what happened to her mother, and so we actively developed that side of the show also for financial reasons, because if Jared's a different guy every week, you don't have any standing sets. He's also a guy who's on the run, so who's he going to talk to? How are you going to tell that story when it's just a guy alone? And those were some challenges, and we knew that we were going to have some standing sets to go to, and that became the center. So some of it's practical. When you create a show like that, you have to think long-term from the reader being a studio or a network saying, God, I love your pilot idea of the astronaut who's stranded on Mars, but what else are we going to do? I mean, who's he going to talk to, and how can we shoot that in a financially responsible way, et cetera, et cetera. You've got to ask yourself those questions when you structure your series or your script. They're vital questions, and especially more so now with the money being tight in the economy, you've kind of got to think of all those avenues.
Yeah. So I wanted to dig into a couple of just nuts and bolts things, and I think The Pretender is a real good sort of an example, maybe a template. How did you find writers? Like, you're now the showrunner of this show, and just talk. I always like to hear real specifics. Like, how did you get those writers, and how did you decide which writers you hired to come on and write that show, and which ones you didn't necessarily?
When you read a spec script from a writer trying to be staffed, Steve and I always like to say, when The Pretender started, the pilot script was a certain song that was playing in our heads. We knew the tune and we knew the notes and all that. So when we would read somebody's spec script, we would look for, in our case, since The Pretender was a show that never really fit a category, it wasn't a cop show, it wasn't a doctor show, it never fit really a category, we had to listen to that sort of like music in somebody's sample script. So for me, it was always like, oh, that writer really surprised me with what they did in the 3rd act or 4th act of their script, and it really blew me away and took me by surprise. Let's have them in and discuss and see what kind of thoughts they have. And so that's how we initially put our first staff together, which I think was probably 5 or 6 writers. They each possessed something kind of just lyrical in their script that was unique to what we were trying to do on The Pretender. Now, if I had a cop show, a by-the-book cop show or doctor show, I'd probably look for that really solid, gritty, dramatic storytelling from a spec doctor, cop, or lawyer show. We were looking for something different. And then, as it turns out, in the writer's room, I think of the first 5 writers we hired, I think only two made the cut after 6 episodes or however they structured the deal. And those were the ones who would keep surprising us in the room. It's the writer that sits on his or her hands or doesn't say much. You're not going to get anywhere that way. You've got to be bold. You've got to go into that writer's room. You can't be afraid to be slammed down by what's perceived as a stupid idea. Our youngest writer on The Pretender, and we joke about this with him today, Carlos Cotto, who ended up running CW show. I can't remember the name of it. I'm sorry, but anyway, he was the young buck in the room, and we'd throw out 100 ideas, and then he'd throw out 100 more, and Then we think, what was that thing you said an hour and a half ago about the chimpanzee with eczema? And it would be like, yeah, I said something about a chimpanzee with eczema. And we say, that might be the answer we're looking for. So I tell writers all the time, never be afraid to throw out your ideas, because that's the only way you're going to get judged on, do you belong in this writer's room? I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to hear that really it starts with the script, as you were literally, as a showrunner, reading scripts, and it doesn't sound like their resume was all that important, like how important, oh, well, this writer wrote on this, this, and this. It was more about the sample that they submitted.
Yeah, it really was, especially with the lower level people, because you know, they're going to learn on the job, and we at that point had enough experience where we were confident that we could teach them, our staff, what we're looking for, and it's not a democracy. You know, if you're going to go to work for whoever, let's just say Dick Wolf at Law and Order, you're going to do his show because it's his show. So we were confident that we could teach our staff that song that's in our head, because that's what we need it to be. It doesn't mean that we're not going to use your ideas. We used a lot of our writing staff's ideas. In fact, as the seasons progressed, you know, our big storylines took zigs and zags based on great ideas that our staff had. But it was still a music in our heads that had to fit sort of our template. So their resume really didn't matter. The one resume that did matter was about one episode in. No, it was right after the pilot, actually. We met a guy named Tommy Thompson who had been on Quantum Leap, and his resume, we looked at his because we needed help. We were falling behind, and the network and the studio said, you can hire somebody. And we saw his resume, and Quantum Leap had sort of a similar kind of feel to it. And I don't think we ever read a script to Tommy's, and we hired him. We interviewed him and hired him. And Tommy's a brilliant writer, and he ended up writing some of our deepest, greatest episodes we ever had. So it just goes to show you it can happen in any number of ways.
Yeah.
But
so let's
most of all, write that spec script that you just believe in your heart, soul's in, and it'll work for you.
Mm-hmm. And so let's reverse that question now. If you are a young writer coming up, how do you go about sort of getting in the head of the showrunner, of the creator of that show? How can you write in their voice and make that story sound like something that was written by the creator?
Well, you can't really customize it. Only if there's a series that's been on for a few episodes, or let's say you were able to actually see the pilot episode before it hit the air. If you were able to write a spec script of something else that sort of had a feel for that show, that'd be one way. But it all happens pretty quickly now. Actually, with the proliferation of the internet, you know, pilot scripts are out there even before they're shot. So I know my agents, they get the pilot scripts to their clients early on, so they can see what's being bought, and so they can get the voice in their head of shows that might get on the air. So now there's more of that. So my advice would be, if you have an agent, try to get a hold of as many of the scripts that are being shot for pilots as you can, or the ones that have full series orders. Get them as early as you can, read them, dissect them, try to figure out what that common link is in each episode if there's multiple episodes, and just do your homework. I mean, I'm a big believer that there's no substitute for hard work. It's one of the few things that writers can control. There's so many things out of your control, but how hard you work, how diligent you are, and how much homework you do, you can control as a writer. So do your homework. Early on in our career, we like to tell the story how I won't use the word broke into the offices of a famous comedy show to get a sample of their script so we could see what their writing template was. But the door was unlocked and it was late and nobody was there, so we helped ourselves. Anyway, but by doing that, we got their template and we wrote a spec of their script in exactly their form. So if they're reading it, they're thinking, wow, these guys really know what we do. And it was all part of just getting, you know, now you don't have to break into offices, you just get it offline. But just do your homework and do as much research as you can on who created the show and what they're going for. There's interviews now where they're talking about their show before it even hits the air. just due diligence and try to get into their heads that way as best you can.
Yeah. So another question I have, and this is kind of a pretty broad, general question. I heard an interview once between, it was Robert Rodriguez interviewing Quentin Tarantino, and they were talking about Pulp Fiction. Pulp Fiction was already finished, but it hadn't been released, and the executives were watching the movie, sort of a screening before it was released, and they were sitting there watching this thinking, I don't think this is going to work. And there was still doubt, even in Quentin Tarantino's mind, whether it was going to work. And I'm curious, looking back at your own career, you know, I'm sure, like, from your standpoint, you put the same heart and soul in The Pretender as you did into The Flash or into Cobra. But was there any differences? Like, were there some warning signs, or can you look back on The Pretender and say, yeah, looking back, I understand why this one worked? Or even as you were going through it, did you just have a good feeling that this one was going to get a good run versus some of the other shows? Was there anything different, or did it just seem kind of random?
No, there was nothing random. I don't say this about I've written a lot of pilots, I've written a lot of scripts, and both Steve and I had the same exact feeling when we were writing The Pretender. There was just something in my gut, my soul, my heart, whatever a writer wants to call it, that place where you just know that what you're doing is good and different. I just knew that this script was going to sell. I don't know how. It felt different and unique, and it felt fresh, and it felt like everything we were doing with it, scene for scene for scene, was the right move. And, you know, as writers, we always have doubts about maybe this beat isn't as good as it should be, or maybe I'm going the wrong path here. We just had this gut feel that what we were writing was going to get sold, was going to run on the air for years, and be a success. I don't know how. But I'll tell you this. What happened, we shot the pilot, and the director, while he did a lot of good things, he changed our concept quite a bit. And we knew when we saw the rough cut, NBC walked out of the rough cut, and we knew it was not the way he edited it and the changes he made were going to kill the show. So we said to the network, let us take it into the editing room for 2 days and put it back the way we think it should be. And that's the cut that tested bigger than ER. So in that case, we were able to see this baby of ours sort of done wrong, and we had the benefit of fixing it to have it be done right, and that's a luxury that you don't usually get. Another project that we did, Tin Man, which was a miniseries for Sci-Fi Channel, we were reimagining the Wizard of Oz. You know, we were fraught with, like, we're going to get either crucified for this or people are going to embrace it. And it turned out it was a very successful show, and we got a little of both. But to Sci-Fi's credit, they said, just cut your minds loose, your imaginations loose, do whatever you want. And then from there, and we had some really wild stuff in the first drafts, and they said, well, this works, this doesn't, and we could see it too. So a lot of it's trial and error, but it's giving yourselves a chance to write it a little bigger than it should be or crazier. You can always pull it back. And that's what rewriting and reconfiguring is all about.
Mm-hmm. But you definitely don't think you ever had this feeling, like this gut feeling that this was going to work. You never had that about a project that didn't work.
I never had it that strongly, although I just finished a pilot that I had the same feeling about. So time will tell if I end up selling that or not. But I feel I have a really good gut feel about that one too. But we'll see. But it was really strong on The Pretender, very strong.
Yeah.
And it was Tin Man too. Tin Man was a thing. We went in and pitched Mark Stern at Sci-Fi, and he hated our pitch for this other idea. He said, "Guys, there must be some pet project you've always wanted to do." And we said, "Yeah, we've always wanted to do a miniseries about a cop in Oz." And he lit up. And before we even got back to our office, he was calling our agents. We want to do a miniseries deal, and he just loved it. And so that was an idea that we came up. We sort of had that same feeling, like the cop in Oz. It's so simple, but it's so different and so out there, and it ended up being very successful for us too. So listen to your instincts, because that's what you got to write from.
Yeah, yeah. So I always like to just wrap up the interviews by asking people how people can learn more about you, follow along. If you have a Twitter account, Facebook account, website, blog, anything you feel comfortable sharing, you can just say that now, and I will gather this stuff up and put it in the show notes as well, so people can just click over to it. But any of those types of things you use.
Sure. We have a website called thepretenderlives.com. And it covers a lot about our career, but mostly it focuses on the Pretender, and it reaches a global audience. The Pretender had a very global audience. So thepretenderlives.com. I'm at Craig Van Sickle 1 on Twitter, and my probably the best email to reach me is thepretendercreators at yahoo.com.
You're very brave giving out an email.
Well, I know, but that's okay.
Yahoo.com. Okay, perfect. And is The Pretenders available anywhere online? Like, is it streaming on any service?
Yeah, it's on Netflix. I think several others. It's on DVDs if anybody buys those anymore. But
okay.
Yeah, it's streaming now, and it seems to hold up pretty well. There's occasionally I'll check in on it, and there's episodes where I'm like, what were we thinking? It's such a bad episode. But there's a lot of them that still hold up. So give it a look. It was kind of one of the first of its type of shows, and I hope you enjoy it. It was a thrill doing it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, Craig, thank you very much. This has been a great interview. I know nothing about TV writing, and I get a lot of people emailing me saying, hey, what's maybe you can tell us, interview some TV writers. So this has been fantastic, and I know people are going to get a lot of great information out of this.
Great. Well, good luck to everybody. Keep writing, and you'll break through.
I just want to mention two things I'm doing at Selling Your Screenplay to help screenwriters find producers who are looking for material. First, I've created a monthly newsletter that will be sent directly to producers. Every member of SYS Select can submit one logline per newsletter. I went and I emailed my large database of producers and asked them if they would like to receive this monthly newsletter of pitches. So far, I have well over 350 producers who have signed up to receive it. These are producers hungry for material and ready to read scripts from new writers. So if you want to participate in this pitch newsletter and get your script into the hands of lots of producers, sign up at sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. And secondly, I have partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads services, so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, I've been getting 10 to 12 high-quality paid leads per week. These are producers or production companies who are actively looking to buy material or are looking to hire a screenwriter for a specific project. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. These leads run the gamut from production companies looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their ideas. Producers are looking for shorts, features, TV, and web series pilots. So it's a huge array of different types of projects that these producers are looking for. And these leads are exclusive to our partner and SYS Select members. Again, to sign up, go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.